Valentinian III, born the 2nd July 419 AD, was born Flavius Placidus Valentinianus. He would reign from 425 to 455 AD. Upon the death of Honorius in 423 AD, the Emperor John would take the throne. He was not a member of the Theodosian dynasty, so Valentinian III and his mother Galla Placidia, who were in the court of Theodosius II, made him go to the west and try to stop John. So they went over with armies and defeated John, and Valentinian III was placed on the throne as Augustus. And his early reign would be dominated by his mother, who would have many men in the court compete for influence, including three, which would be Bonifacius, Felix, and Aetius. Aetius would have Felix killed, only leaving Aetius and Bonifacius to contend with power, along with Galla Placidia, who was a de facto regent during this time. Let's talk about Aetius. Aetius, at the end of John's reign, was sent to the Huns, and would be there and go back in the court of Valentinian III. And he would be a very competent military commander. But Bonifacius and Aetius were having a serious falling out. And Bonifacius, since Aetius had gained power as Magister Militum, was in Africa rebelling. And Bonifacius was defeated by a Roman general, and he implied that the Vandals should come and assist him and would help the rebellion. For this, he agreed to give the Vandals much of Africa, although they had already been one of the tribes that had migrated during Christmas Day during Honorius' reign, and went through Gaul and then Hispania. Before this, they had migrated from Hispania to Africa, so they already had a presence there. And with this help, they managed to take most of Africa. But then Bonifacius went back to Romans and reconciled with them. He then was sent to Africa, but he would be crushed by the Vandals as he was leading an army against them for the imperial reconquest. So he reconciled and would have a falling out with Aetius, because Aetius and Bonifacius hated each other. So they fought a civil war where Bonifacius would defeat Aetius in battle, but Bonifacius would sustain wounds from the battle that would eventually kill him, leaving Aetius as the sole power behind Valentinian. And he would go on to try to stabilize the empire, but it really would not be too effective since the empire had been so weakened monetarily and in the wartime. So after this, he tried to focus on Gaul. He would win some battles, but then he would lose a battle in the Situation Gaul, where he fought the Visigoths and the Franks during this time between 427 and 432. This left weakness to the empire and the rise of the Vandalic kingdom, as they had agreed with Bonifacius to have much of Africa, and since he was defeated, they now had a foothold and would take the islands of Sardinia and Corsica after the empire recognized them and had a de facto. But after this recognition, they really did not care about the empire, so they just took Sardinia and Corsica, and the empire was much too weak since Aetius was focusing on other things to gain it back. And now the Vandals raided a bunch, and Vandalic piracy would be a terrible thing for the West and the East, as it would just be terrible for the economy, as fearing about getting robbed by pirates are not very good for trade and other things. And the West is really losing control of the Mediterranean after this. And also during this time, they're also losing much of Hispania. The Suebi were in the West, and the Visigoths controlled much of Spain, with tribes in the north, like it had been during old Roman times. And they controlled the Romans, a small sliver in the northeast, but it would not matter much. So due to all these losses of Africa, also during this time, part of Pannonia was lost to the Huns, Gaul's collapsing, Hispania's collapsing, Valentinian's forced to raise taxes, which is an unpopular move. And he's forced to create a sales tax and tax the elite much more. So let's talk about the Hunnic situation. As I already mentioned, the Huns took over part of Pannonia, and Valentinian's sister, Honoria, was an unwanted marriage. So she pleaded with Attila to free her. So Attila invaded Gaul in the Western Empire, and from 441 to 449, the Huns were already raiding. So they were probably already accustomed to the terrain, and this is also a reason for the devastation of the empire before the Hunnic raids. And so Aetius built up a Germanic confederation of Visigoths in the area and Franks and other Germanic tribes, because these are the people that fled the Huns and they were terrible to them. And if the Huns went to Gaul, it would just be as bad for the Romans as it would be for the Germanic people that were living there. So, with the Germanic Confederation and the Roman army under Aetius and the Hunnic army under Attila, they fought. Now, this battle is pretty foggy. We do know the Visigothic king Theodoric died in the battle, but it was either a stalemate or a victory for Aetius. And Attila went back across the Rhine and was out of Gaul. But later on, after he regrouped, he launched an invasion of Italy. This invasion would not be good for the empire, as along his way to Italy, the city of Aquileia was completely decimated, never to exist again. It was completely wiped off the face of the earth. And some of this people would found cities in northeastern Italy, which could become Venice later on. And so he was marching to Rome, and there's a story of Pope Leo convincing Attila to leave Italy. And this might not be true, as the empire of Attila was going through famine, at least the army was, and there was probably a plague going on at this time, and the Germans from later on were probably very discontent and were in a rebellious mood. So he probably just left Italy to go handle the affairs of the empire. But shortly after he left Italy, he would die, leaving the empire to be destroyed, as after this they would fight a battle with the Germanic people living under them, and the empire of Attila the Hun, and the Hunnic Empire in general, would collapse. And this would be a very unique time in history where most of Europe would be divided between the Romans and the Huns, and the Huns were annihilated even before the Romans were. So now Valentinian III is secure. So what does he do after this? No more Huns, none of that. So Aetius was prominent and basically dominated him. So Valentinian III had him executed. Now this would be terrible for the empire, as Valentinian executed a competent general and statesman. One of the ministers remarked that you have cut your right hand with your left, which would be not a good thing. And shortly after this, many people were discontent that he had executed him. And one of these, Petronius Maximus, wanted him to die, as he had imperial ambitions and wanted to become emperor. There's also a story that he raped one of the family members of Petronius. That's a story that Valentinian did that. And maybe this was just dramatic and just him wanting to include the story, but it is possible that maybe Valentinian raped somebody and it made Petronius want to get revenge on Valentinian. But Petronius would have two men execute Valentinian and he would die. And this would mark the end of the Theodosian dynasty, as now it would just be lawlessness until the end of the empire, almost 20 years later. So, was Valentinian III a good Roman emperor? I would have F tier. He basically led the downfall of his own reign, and would largely just be incompetent. Again, we don't talk about Valentinian much, as like Honorius, as he would just be dominated by his generals and his ministers at the court, and another weak and incompetent emperor. And he did pull up, like Honorius, execute a good general. For Honorius it was Stilicho, and for Valentinian it was Aetius. Valentinian III is probably slightly better, as he did not pull a sack of Rome moment, and at least Rome did not get sacked in his reign. That's quite lucky of him, because Attila may have did that. Although we can see that this will not last long. And overall, we're just seeing the further collapse of the empire, most of Spain being lost, most of Africa being lost, Gaul slowly drifting away with the Franks and the Visigoths, Much of Noricum is slowly being degraded, and Pannonia is gone. So, anyway, subscribe, like. I hope you enjoyed the video.